My name is Emily Carter. I am 34 years old. After a decade of marriage, my husband ended our relationship and quickly remarried the daughter of a billionaire. In a single instant, the life I had spent 10 years building fell apart completely. Overnight, I found myself alone, responsible for raising my 6-year-old son, paying rent, covering school expenses, and trying to survive with almost no money left in my bank account. My ex-husband didn't just walk away from the marriage, he took nearly everything with him. The house was registered under his name. Most of the savings were in accounts that belonged to him, and the legal battle drained the small amount of money I still had. With no other option, I accepted a job as a live-in caregiver for an elderly billionaire whom everyone claimed had become mentally unstable. At that time, I kept telling myself it was simply employment, nothing more, but on my very first night inside that enormous mansion, something happened that made my heart nearly stop. And in that moment, I understood that this job was going to change my life in ways I never imagined. Before I explain what actually took place, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which country you're watching from. Now, let's start the story. Only a few weeks after my divorce, I faced a frightening realization. If I didn't find work quickly, I wouldn't even be able to pay my son's school tuition. That's when I noticed an online job listing: live-in caregiver required, private estate, excellent salary. The description mentioned that the patient was an elderly billionaire whose mental condition had become unstable. Most people probably would have ignored an offer like that. But I didn't have the luxury of choosing. I submitted my application that very night. 2 days later, I was standing in front of the largest mansion I had ever seen in my life. There were towering black gates, a long stone driveway, and a massive building that looked more like a luxury hotel than someone's home. A woman in her 40s opened the front door. "You must be Emily," she said. I nodded, feeling slightly nervous. "I'm Victoria Langford, Mr. Langford's daughter." She looked elegant and perfectly dressed. Her smile was flawless. Yet there was something distant about her eyes as she led me inside. "Before you begin," she said in a calm tone, "you should understand that my father's condition is extremely difficult." "How difficult?" I asked. She paused before answering. "Most caregivers quit within a few days." That statement probably should have scared me, but instead I simply said I wouldn't quit, not because I was brave, because I couldn't afford to. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "My father used to be one of the most influential businessmen in the country," she explained as we walked through a long hallway. "But during the past year, his mental state has become unstable." "What kind of unstable?" I asked carefully. "He shouts, throws objects, and sometimes even attacks the staff." "Great, just great." Still, I reminded myself why I was there. An image of my son appeared in my mind, his small school uniform, his lunchbox, his tiny backpack. I knew I couldn't fail him. Eventually, we stopped in front of a large wooden door. "My father's room," Victoria said while opening it. Inside, an elderly man sat in a wheelchair, staring silently at the window. His hair was gray and unkempt, and his hands trembled slightly. The moment he noticed me, his expression changed. "Who is that?" he suddenly shouted. I froze. Victoria sighed like this was a normal occurrence and calmly explained that I was the new caregiver, but the old man immediately shouted that he didn't want another one. He slammed his hand against the armrest, grabbed a glass from the nearby table, and threw it across the room. It shattered loudly against the wall. My heart jumped. Victoria barely reacted. "This is what I deal with every day," she said calmly. The old man continued muttering angrily while I slowly stepped closer. I greeted him softly, introduced myself, and explained that I was there to help. He glared at me. "Leave me alone," he snapped. Still, I didn't move. For a moment, he stared at me. Then he turned his wheelchair back toward the window and completely ignored me. Victoria looked slightly surprised. "That's actually better than usual," she said. She explained the medication schedule, his daily routine, and where everything was stored before leaving me alone with him. The rest of the day moved slowly. He refused help, shouted several times, and even knocked over a chair once, but somehow I managed to get through the first day. By evening, I felt completely exhausted. One of the housemaids showed me my bedroom on the second floor. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable enough. Around 9 p.m., I walked downstairs to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The mansion was extremely quiet, almost too quiet. As I passed through the living room, I suddenly heard laughter. A man's voice. I stopped immediately. That voice sounded strangely familiar. My heart started pounding as I slowly stepped into the room. A tall man stood near the bar table holding a drink. When he turned and saw me, his smile slowly widened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Because the man standing there was my ex-husband, Daniel, the same man who divorced me after 10 years of marriage and married a billionaire's daughter. He slowly looked me up and down, then laughed. "Well, well," he said, "I guess life didn't go very well for you, did it?" My hands began trembling. Daniel took a sip of his drink and smirked. "So this is what you do now?" he asked. "Working here as a caregiver." Then he leaned closer and whispered mockingly, "You're basically a servant in this house." My chest tightened. "I should go," I said quietly, but Daniel laughed again. "Go ahead," he said, "then tell me how you plan to feed your kid without this job." His words cut deeply because he knew exactly where it would hurt. Then he stepped aside and gestured around the enormous mansion. "Welcome to your workplace," he said coldly. "And try not to break anything, employee." At that moment, a terrifying realization struck me. The woman who had married my ex-husband was the same billionaire's daughter who owned this house. And somehow I had just become an employee inside their mansion. For several seconds I couldn't move, my thoughts were spinning. Out of every house in the city, out of every job I could have accepted, I had somehow ended up working for the woman who destroyed my marriage. Daniel leaned against the table, watching my reaction. "You look shocked," he said with a smirk. I didn't answer. "What's wrong?" he continued mockingly. "Didn't you know whose house this was?" "No," I said quietly. "Well," he said, "now you do." He slowly walked around me, clearly enjoying the moment. "Life is funny," he said. 10 years ago you were my wife." He paused, then laughed softly. "And now you're working here as a caregiver." His words felt like sharp needles. For a moment I wanted to quit immediately. I imagined packing my bags, leaving the mansion and never seeing these people again, but another thought appeared in my mind. My son, his school tuition was due next month. The rent needed to be paid, groceries had to be bought. I closed my eyes for a second and forced myself to remain calm. Daniel noticed the change in my expression. "Oh, I understand," he said. "You need this job." I stayed silent. He chuckled. "Don't worry. I won't fire you." Then he leaned closer and whispered, "Someone still has to take care of the crazy old man." My fists tightened, but I didn't respond. A moment later, he finished his drink, placed the glass on the table, and walked toward the stairs. "Good night, Emily," he said casually, "and try not to get hit by anything tomorrow." He likes throwing things. Then he disappeared upstairs. I stood there alone for a long time. That night I barely slept. Part of me wanted to leave the mansion immediately. But the stronger part reminded me why I had come. My son needed me to stay. The next morning my work truly began. When I entered Mr. Langford's room, he was already awake. The moment he saw me, he frowned in annoyance. "You again," he muttered. "Yes," I replied calmly. "Me again." He turned his wheelchair slightly away from the table and complained that he had already told everyone he didn't need a babysitter. "I'm not here to babysit you," I answered gently. "I'm here to help." He stared at me suspiciously for several seconds. Suddenly, he grabbed a small book from the table and hurled it toward the wall. "Leave," he shouted. The book hit the wall and dropped to the floor. Without reacting, I walked over, picked it up, and placed it back where it had been. "I'm not leaving," I said quietly. For a brief moment, he looked surprised. Then he turned away and began mumbling under his breath. The morning routine wasn't easy. Sometimes he refused to eat. Other times he shouted for no reason. But little by little, I started learning how to deal with him. When I spoke softly, he calmed down slightly. When I gave him space, he stopped yelling. By the third day, something small but important happened. He allowed me to help him drink water without shouting. It may have seemed like a tiny victory to others, but to me it felt significant. Meanwhile, Daniel appeared in the house occasionally, and every time he saw me, he made sure to humiliate me. Once he loudly warned me to be careful with a tray, saying servants should always be cautious. Another time he told a guest with a laugh, "She used to be my wife." The guest looked at me with sympathy while Daniel simply smiled proudly. Every time it happened, I stayed silent. Because losing this job wasn't an option. A week passed. Then one morning, something unusual occurred. 2 doctors arrived at the mansion carrying medical bags and went straight to Mr. Langford's room. Victoria followed them. They closed the door, but I could still hear voices from inside. About 30 minutes later, the doctors left. When I entered the room afterward, I immediately noticed something strange. Mr. Langford's condition looked worse than before. He seemed more confused and his hands were shaking more than usual. Suddenly, he started shouting again, louder than before. It felt like the progress we had made during the week had suddenly disappeared. Without warning, he grabbed the plate from the table and threw it across the room. Food scattered across the floor. "Get out," he yelled. "Mr. Langford, please," I began. Before I could finish speaking, he grabbed a glass of water and threw it in my direction. The glass struck my shoulder and shattered on the floor. The noise brought two servants rushing into the room. "Sir, please calm down," one of them said, but Mr. Langford seemed completely out of control. He pushed his wheelchair forward aggressively and tried grabbing anything within reach to throw. One of the servants quickly opened a cabinet and pulled out a small medical kit. "I'm sorry, sir," he said nervously. He prepared a syringe. Within seconds, they gave Mr. Langford an injection. At first he struggled, but gradually his movement slowed, his shouting faded. Finally he became quiet, his head dropped slightly to one side as the medicine took effect. The room fell silent again. One of the servants sighed. "Don't worry," he told me, "this happens sometimes," but something about the situation didn't feel right. Just the day before, Mr. Langford had begun trusting me. And now he suddenly seemed worse than ever. That night, something happened that changed everything. I was walking through the hallway near the study when I heard voices coming from inside. Victoria's voice and Daniel's. The door was slightly open. I hadn't intended to listen, but then I heard something that made me stop. "The medicines are working," Victoria said quietly. Daniel laughed softly. "How long before he completely loses control?" he asked. Victoria answered calmly, "Not long, maybe a few more weeks." My heart started pounding. Then Daniel said something that made my blood run cold. "And once the doctors declare him mentally unfit," Victoria finished his sentence, "everything will belong to us." They both laughed. I quickly stepped away from the door before they could notice me. My mind raced with questions. What did they mean the medicines were working? What medicines? The next morning, while helping Mr. Langford with breakfast, something unexpected happened. He suddenly looked at me very seriously. For the first time since I met him, his eyes seemed completely clear. "Listen carefully," he whispered. I froze. "They're trying to make me look insane." I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. He leaned closer. "The medicine," he said slowly. "It's poisoning my mind." I stared at him. Part of me wondered if this was simply another symptom of his illness, but another part remembered the conversation I had overheard. Suddenly, Mr. Langford grabbed my wrist. His voice sounded desperate. "I'm not crazy," he whispered. "They're trying to make me crazy." For a moment I didn't know what to say. His words echoed in my head. Victoria saying the medicines were working. Daniel saying everything would become theirs. Slowly I looked into Mr. Langford's eyes again. They were clear, not wild, not confused. "Just tired and afraid." "You're right," I said quietly. He blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" he asked. I told him about the conversation I had overheard between his daughter and Daniel. For several seconds he remained silent, then his shoulders slowly dropped. It was as if the last piece of hope inside him had finally broken. Tears appeared in his eyes. He spoke quietly about how he had built everything in that house, his companies, his empire, his entire life, and now his own daughter wanted to steal it while he was still alive. His voice trembled as he said that if they succeeded, he would lose everything. Seeing that strong old man suddenly look so helpless hurt my heart. For a moment, I thought about my own life. How I had lost everything after my husband left me, how helpless I had felt trying to protect my child. I took a deep breath, and then I said something that surprised even me. "I won't leave you alone," I told him. "No matter what happens, I'll help you." He looked at me in disbelief. For the first time since we met, a small spark appeared in his eyes. That night we made a plan. The next morning I secretly checked his medications again. Just as I suspected, the pills were designed to confuse his mind and make him appear unstable. I decided to take a huge risk. I stopped giving him those pills. Instead, I secretly replaced them with the proper medication provided by a trusted doctor. At first, nothing changed. But after a few days, small improvements began appearing. Mr. Langford's thoughts became clearer. His speech grew calmer, his mind sharper. However, our plan required one important rule. He could not show any improvement. If Victoria noticed he was getting better, she would become suspicious. So we did something unusual. Whenever she entered the room, Mr. Langford pretended to be unstable, and he performed the act perfectly. The first time she visited, he suddenly grabbed a pillow and threw it across the room while shouting angrily. Victoria smiled with satisfaction. Standing behind her, Daniel laughed and said he was getting worse every day. Meanwhile, I stood beside the bed pretending to struggle to calm him. But inside, I knew the truth. Every day, Mr. Langford was becoming stronger. Days passed, then weeks. For 3 months, we kept up the act. Every time Victoria visited, he screamed, threw objects, and acted confused. And every time she left the room smiling, completely convinced her plan was succeeding. But behind closed doors, everything was different. Mr. Langford's mind had almost completely recovered. he began reading again, speaking normally. Even discussing business matters with the lawyers I secretly contacted. Finally, one morning, Victoria made her move. She announced an important meeting. Doctors, lawyers, and board members were invited to the mansion. Daniel looked extremely confident that day. The excitement in Victoria's eyes was obvious. "This is the final step," she told Daniel. "Once the doctors declare him mentally unstable, everything will belong to us." Daniel smiled proudly. The meeting began in the large living room. Everyone sat around a long table. I stood quietly beside Mr. Langford's wheelchair. Victoria spoke first. She dramatically explained that her father's mental condition had become dangerous, that he screamed constantly, threw objects, and could no longer manage his own decisions. One of the doctors nodded thoughtfully. Victoria continued confidently. Because of this, she believed control of his estate should legally be transferred to her. Daniel leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. Then something unexpected happened. Mr. Langford moved. Instead of shouting, he slowly sat up straight in his wheelchair. His voice was calm. "I don't think that will be necessary," he said. The entire room fell silent. Victoria's face turned pale. "Father," she whispered. He looked directly at her. "For 3 months," he said calmly, "I've been pretending." Daniel jumped up from his chair. "What nonsense is this?" he demanded, but Mr. Langford continued speaking. He explained how they had tried to poison his mind with medication to steal his companies. The doctors looked confused. One of the lawyers opened a folder. "We have already investigated the medication," he said. "The dosage was intentionally harmful." Victoria's hands began shaking. "That's a lie," she shouted. But the lawyer continued. "We also have recorded conversations confirming the plan." Daniel's confident expression vanished. Everyone in the room slowly turned toward him and Victoria. "Mr. Langford then pointed gently toward me. "This woman saved my life," he said. "If she hadn't discovered the truth, they would have succeeded." All eyes turned to me. Victoria screamed in anger. "You ruined everything," but it was already too late. The truth had been revealed. The board members looked furious. The lawyers immediately began legal procedures. Within minutes, the police arrived at the mansion. They calmly placed Victoria and Daniel under arrest despite their loud protests. For the first time, they looked completely defeated. Mr. Langford then turned toward me. His voice was soft. "You stayed when everyone else would have left," he said. "You protected me when my own family betrayed me." Then he looked at the lawyers. "Prepare the documents," the lawyer nodded. "Mr. Langford has already made his decision," he announced. "His entire estate will be transferred to Emily Carter." Gasps filled the room. Daniel looked like he couldn't breathe. The same man who once laughed at me for being poor now stood speechless. Victoria collapsed into her chair. Mr. Langford looked at me kindly. "You came here as a caregiver," he said, "but you became the daughter I should have had." Tears filled my eyes. Just a few months earlier, I had entered that mansion as a desperate mother trying to survive, and now my life had changed forever, not because of revenge, not because of wealth, but because sometimes doing the right thing can change everything.